We are at the forefront of many innovative and exciting things developing in the world of senior living. With Tim Mallett, CEO of Forefront Living, as our guide, this show will shine a light on how older adults can embrace these changes to live active, happy, fulfilling, and thriving lives. Through discussions with senior living and hospice professionals, architects and designers, and people of all ages, will help today's seniors envision the art of the possible and take steps toward achieving the future of their dreams. Welcome to At the Forefront.
Welcome. I'm Tim Mallett, CEO of Forefront Living, and welcome to At the Forefront. Very excited about our guest today. It's not often that we have repeat guests, but today we're talking to John Luckadoo, who is a resident of Presbyterian Village North, and also I'm happy to claim him as a very good friend. Lucky, as we know, John, is, and I'm going to read this to make sure I get it right because there's a number of obstacles here that could come across incorrect if I don't, is the last living original pilot of the World War II era 8th Army Air Corps 100th Bomb Group, also known as the Bloody 100th, and known as the Bloody 100th not because of accuracy, unfortunately, because of the casualties that were incurred during the war. I think what makes today special is we are actually on the cusp of the third anniversary of Lucky's first appearance on this podcast. So welcome, Lucky.
Thank you, Tim. So nice to be with you again.
It's nice to be with you as well. And when you first appeared on the podcast, you were looking forward to a significant milestone, which was a birthday that has come and gone since. And can you tell us what birthday that was?
100.
And which birthday is just around the corner in a couple of months?
I'll be 102 in March.
It's phenomenal. And during our discussion, we talked quite a bit about your experiences during the war and about that time. And I think since then, the story has caught quite a bit of interest. You recently made a trip back to England. Can you tell us about that and the purpose of that trip?
I did. I returned to England last month to commemorate the 80th anniversary of my worst mission, which was at the beginning of what we call Black Week, which took place from October 8th to the 14th of 1943. And as we have subsequently discovered, was actually the beginning of the defeat of the Luftwaffe, or the German Air Force, in England during World War II by the 8th Air Force.
So you went to England, you made the trip, 101 years of age. How were you received in England upon your arrival?
Well, I was gloriously received because I was the only one of our group, which consisted of about 16 people, who was actually there for the event that we were commemorating. And we were there for 2 weeks, visited London and the old Churchill bunkers and Imperial War Museum, and I was actually privileged to participate in a ceremony that was quite phenomenal, where in the St. Paul's Cathedral, they have a memorial book listing the 750-odd names of those who died in the 8th Air Force. And each day they unlock this glass case, and the burgher of the church turns over one page. And he allowed me to be the page turner for the day that we were there. which was really a remarkable experience. It so happened I noticed as I started to turn the page that there was a pair of white gloves over at the side, and I started reaching for them. Oh, no, don't dare touch those. They're for the Queen.
That's incredible.
So the Queen had inaugurated that ceremony in 1954, where they turn a page each day, and of course they have a duplicate of this. It's over at the side where people can actually look up the names of the people that they want to research, and but that was really a highlight of the trip as well.
I can only imagine. And you at the beginning of our discussion, you mentioned Black Week and your most difficult mission, and I believe that mission was over Bremen, Germany.
It was over Bremen, and that is the beginning chapter of the recounting of that mission as the start of my book.
That was the milestone I was going to ask you about. Your story has been recorded in a book entitled Damn Lucky, and I think appropriately titled for a number of reasons. Can you tell us how the book came about?
Well, the book came about quite strangely because I had this call out of the blue one day from a writer named Kevin Maurer. And I said, "I'm sorry, but I've never heard of you." And he said, "Well, I'm a writer, and I'm aware of some of your stories that are on YouTube and Facebook, and I'd like to read your book." And I said, "I don't have a book." And he said, "Well, certainly your experiences should be documented and recounted. And since I'm a writer, would you agree to or consider collaborating with me to write your story?" And I said, "Well, I'm not familiar with your writing style or anything about you." And he said, "Well, let me send you some copies of some of the 10 books that I've already written and let you evaluate that." And so he did, and I got back with him, and he said, "Well," I said, "you've never written anything about the air wars, and so you're apparently not familiar with the terminology and vernacular and what we did and that sort of thing." He said, "Well, I'm a quick learner, and I'll research it, and I'll get up to speed on that." So, and believe me, he did. He's a wonderful interviewer. He's a wonderful researcher and historian, and I was impressed. So we agreed, and I said, "Well, you'll have to handle the publisher because I have no experience with that, and I don't want any part of it." And he said, "Okay, I'll take care of that end of it." And just as we agreed to cooperate or collaborate, the COVID hit, the pandemic hit. And he said, "Well, I live in Wilmington, North Carolina, and you're in Dallas, and I don't dare come to Dallas to interview you and then go back and write several chapters and send them to you for approval. But we can do this over the phone." And so without ever having met face-to-face in person, he started interviewing me almost daily for an hour or 2 hours to pull out my various factors about the various things that had happened to me, which had not happened to other people or other groups.
How long?
That's how we and we did this for 18 months.
18 months throughout the pandemic, and I know you got pretty adept at Zoom because I participated in a couple of those with you as well.
So he finally came to one of our group reunions, and we met face to face for the first time. and then the book was released, and that's how the book was written, but it was without ever meeting.
Well, and Lucky, I know when I first met you and we talked, it's been a little while. There was a point where you didn't talk about the war, you didn't talk about those times, and you were reluctant. And I think in this phase of life, you've made a commitment to telling these stories again. I was fortunate enough to hear you read some excerpts from the book, and it really transports you not just back to the time, but especially when you were talking about Bremen. It felt like I was in the cockpit with you, and just the energy and emotion. What was it like recounting those stories, and why now?
Well, you're exactly right. For 50 years after the war, I wanted to shut it out and make it a closed chapter in my life because it was so unpleasant. It wasn't happy, and memories, and so I didn't talk about it to my family or to friends or to anyone else. And then one day I was invited to be a keynote speaker at a luncheon for a historical symposium at the University of North Texas. And when I'd finished, the chancellor, who was the sponsor of the symposium, asked me if I had written my speech. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I certainly have, because I wanted to be sure what I said and how I said it. And he said, well, I'm writing a book called Warriors and Scholars, and I'd like to include your presentation in that book with your permission. And I said, well, I'm very flattered that you'd like to include it, and here it is. So that's how it got included in Al Hurley's book called Warriors and Scholars. And from that presentation, I began receiving several invitations to be a speaker at Rotary clubs or Kiwanis or to certain retirement groups. But most importantly, and what really struck me, was history teachers or teachers, even of elementary school grades, such as your daughters, began asking me if I'd be good enough to talk with their classes. And that really captured my attention because I felt so strongly that which amounted to the fourth generation from us who participated in World War II to recount our stories and educate the younger generations as to what sacrifices had been made for the freedom that they enjoy today.
Yeah, I recall that day that you actually went to Good Shepherd Episcopal School, and I believe there were 60 fourth graders there, and I think you talked to them for about an hour. And I remember you received something sort of special after that lecture, I would say.
Well, I certainly did. I stopped at a point and asked for questions. Said, what would you like to know about my experiences? And this little 9-year-old in the back of the room raised his hand and he said, Mr. Luckadoo, you were fighting the Germans. The Germans didn't attack us, the Japanese did. Why were you fighting the Germans? And I said, well, young man, you obviously were listening, so I appreciate the question. And let me tell you that we were fighting certainly fighting on two fronts, the Japanese front as well as the German front, but we were concentrating on Germany first to assist the English and to prevent the invasion of other Nazis of the British Isles.
And I believe they prepared a gift for you, two of the boys that were there.
Well, those classes, as you know, were pen pals of residents at my retirement facility. And a month or two later, we had invited them over to lunch and to see how the older people lived and meet their pen pals for the first time. And so this same young lad came up to me and he said, "Mr. Luckadoo, I prepared this for you." And he handed me a 14-page document that he, in color, on the front page, had outlined all of the flags at the top of the Allied forces and across the bottom of the Axis forces, and he said, "My war." And what it was his impression of what it would be like if he and his best friend were members of my crew.
Wow.
And I was just almost moved to tears to receive that. It's one of my prized possessions. Well, it was certainly wonderful. He didn't get everything exactly right, but he...
Well, if I recall, they thought you dropped the bomb on Japan, but you clarified that.
He did.
And I think that's the importance of telling these stories. How can our listeners or viewers get a copy of this book?
There's several ways. They're in many bookstores. They're available on Amazon, and they also can be obtained by writing 100thbg.com, which is the website for my Bloody Hundredth bomb group. And they're offering them together with some other mementos. So they're available in that fashion.
So we'll have a link posted for that so that our listeners and viewers can click and learn more about it.
All right,
so
thank you.
There's so much to talk about, and in talking about this and talking about people, a couple of names come to mind that maybe you can explain how they have interacted with you. Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and perhaps something that's coming up that also is about the same era?
Well, indeed. In the early 2010, a book was written by a history professor from a university in Virginia called Masters of the Air. And he did a remarkable job of, Donald Miller was his name, and he did a remarkable job of describing what it was like to actually be in the air over Germany, freezing to death at high altitude in unpressurized aircraft, and being shot at from both the ground and the air, and how the air crews acted and reacted to that experience, because it was a new way of warfare. It had never been tried before, and we didn't realize it, but we were just guinea pigs trying to prove that it was the best application of the bomber force to bring Hitler to his knees.
So what is something coming up with this? I understand they're making a series. It's a limited series.
They're making a docuseries. They started in 2013, 10 years ago. And they've interviewed me 5 times in the process. They wanted to document the book, but the book contains a history of the entire 8th Air Force, and they realized very early on that it could not be done in 10 episodes. And so as a consequence, they narrowed it down to just this one group. And it happened to be the Bloody Hundredth. And so they've confined it to that, and they've replicated our old air base and B-17s, and they're going to have 21-year-olds impersonate those of us who were actually in the group at that time. And we had some rather colorful characters, and they'll be highlighted. I'll probably not even be mentioned in it because there were a lot of people in the 100th Bomb Group originally, and I was only one. But that docuseries was started first by the HBO, sponsored by them, but then that became part of Verizon, and Verizon was absorbed, and so and then they decided that it was too expensive, and so it was kind of left on the floor for a while, and then they put it out for bid. Apple Plus acquired it, and they picked up the mantle and are now completing it, and it is close to completion. It was for distribution on January the 26th of 2024.
So will it premiere on Apple TV?
It'll premiere on Apple Plus TV.
Plus.
It'll be streaming, and you'll have to subscribe to Apple Plus in order to see it. But it's been widely anticipated. There are some clips of it, some trailers out currently on the internet, and those of us who, of course, the pandemic set it back a couple of years in the process, but it's finally going to be released, we hope.
So it was filmed where?
It was filmed in England by British actors who had to get rid of their British accent in order to impersonate the Yanks. Us.
So we might get to hear a little John Luckadoo with a British accent, perhaps, right?
Quite possibly.
Quite possibly. Very apropos. You know, Lucky, one of the I think great things about what I do for a living is I get to meet people like you, and over the last nearly 8 years, we've had so many discussions, and I have asked you probably too many questions on this topic, but now there's a way for people who don't have access to you or who know you personally to have the same experience and be able to ask questions of you. And I believe there's a, how should we say, a representation of you always available in New Orleans. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, in 2012, the National Museum in New Orleans sent me to Hollywood with a companion for a week. And they put us in a studio, and I was seated in a chair facing the camera, and over the period of 2 days, 2 solid days, and this was during the COVID pandemic, and we had to be checked every time we went in and out the door. They asked me over 850 questions about my life and about my experiences in the war. It was very well researched, and the idea was that 100 years from now, someone can call up this video, and I will be seated there, and he can ask me any question, and it will automatically scroll to the answer, and it'll be just like a one-on-one conversation. And they've done that in holograms so that it's three-dimensional, and it's extremely eerily somewhat impressive, because my ancestors, my descendants, will be able to do this and will never have known me. but they'll be able to ask me any question that they want to.
So have you met Holographic Lucky yet? Is he available yet at the museum?
It's supposed to be available very soon on their website, but I don't know that it is actually available yet.
You mentioned, and we're about to close this interview, so I have to ask you now. Hopefully you'll come back for a third appearance in the very near future, because there's so many more questions I have. But something that struck me, you mentioned a fourth generation hearing these stories. You mentioned the importance of your descendants. I think of our descendants hearing these stories. Why do you want these memorialized? What do you see these doing in the future, us knowing these stories, or future generations knowing these stories?
The importance of them is twofold. Number one, the fact that these sacrifices were made by their antecedents, or they wouldn't be here. And the second is that today, what the current generation has done or is doing to the freedoms that we cherished and we fought, bled, and died for is horrific. We take an oath when we go into service, in military service, to protect our Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And we are being betrayed from within. And that's an horrific realization, a very great disappointment that possibly the result will be that some of my comrades who made the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms that we enjoy today will have done so in vain. And that petrifies me.
Well, Lucky, I think telling these stories, being here today, stressing the importance of the selflessness that you gave and your generation gave, so that we can actually be sitting here today, speaking English in this case, could have been a very different outcome.
Exactly.
I think you have the gratitude of all of your fellow Americans. And I know many people appreciate and recognize what you have done as well as your generation. So I thank you very much for being our guest today, and I look forward to our next meeting, and we can talk about how you celebrated your 102nd birthday, which is just a few weeks away. So
I look forward to being with you again, too. Well, Tim, thank you so much.
Thank you for being at the forefront with me.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening today.